Okay, if everybody can take their seats, we'll get going here. Please take your seats. Thank you for that, Marianne. Those are good cookies. Chocolate chip was good anyways. I think we'll kick it off real quick. I'm going to turn it over to Bernadette with the Solano County Attorney's Office.
Yep. Yes.
And you've got some initial reactions from an airport side, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Exactly. We had planned this a little differently, and then after seeing the amazing technology, I said, you know what, I'll be Debbie Downer for about 5 minutes, and then we'll get back to questioning exactly the whole, everything that they had to offer, because as Matt said, I mean, mind blown as to the possibilities. But as some of us who have been roped in over the years in terms of Chris, some of us just can't say no to her, in part because I am just absolutely forever indebted to her and her calmness in actually getting my master plan approved way back, I think it was in 2008, 2009. But so I will always forever say yes to her. But now I get to pass that off to Adrienne. So next year you may see her up here. But so when she said these are the topics for this year, which one can you help out on? Of course I could do anything. What do you want me to do? I'm going to give you my reaction, because I've always approached this conference from a perspective as how does this affect me? And so obviously I looked at this and thought about this technology in response to how does this affect my airport. So again, it's just my perspective, but I think that based on what you've heard, we can start talking about, or we're hoping to open the conversation so that we can all come to some sort of collective wisdom about where we're going to go, because clearly the future is now. And so with that in mind, I started looking at it from the perspective of, if this were happening to my, am I going? Yeah, just looking at it, so thinking about this particular topic and thinking of what does this look like, not having seen those videos, and again, as I said, my mind was just blown to, wow, how could that happen? Where I'm located, I'm in Solano County, I'm halfway in between Sacramento and San Francisco, so clearly I'm 45 miles each way. This is a prime location, and I thought of, well, wait a minute, I've got a helipad at Nut Tree. We can have a little stop off here. What does this look like? And so I started thinking about that in light of the physical impacts. And so clearly, if you're planning for an electric network such like this, as an airport sponsor, you have to look at, do I have room on my particular airport for something like this? Can they stop off? Again, I particularly happen to have it at Nut Tree. It's on my LP. We have a helicopter-based service out there. But just giving the little legalese to bring us all down in terms of this amazing technology, just remember, if it's not on your ALP, you have to make sure that the FAA has signed off on it, that they've determined that the ALP may not be altered until the FAA has determined that the project will not be adversely affecting the safety, the utility, and the efficiency of the airport. And remember that projects not shown on that would have to have, you'd have to modify your ALP. If it's going to be just a slight tweak, you can just go get by with just maybe just an aeronautical study. But so this idea of like, oh, come to my airport, before you can do that, you have to make sure that you actually have room. Looking at, is there going to be any NEPA associated with this? If I'm changing my LP, do I have to do, as we talked about it before when Jim was here, is it just a level of a CAT X? Are we going with an EA? Or is it so much of a modification to make sure that I have room on my airport to accommodate this? Do I have to go all the way out? Obviously, for purposes of us in California, we'd have to then look at, do I have to modify my airport to make room for this? Do I go through CEQA? Clearly looking at the fiscal impact of this. What happens who's going to pay for this? Looking at it from, again, my poor little airport, I'm looking at AIP funds. If it's not an identified project on my ALP, how do I get the money to pay for this? Who's going to actually do this? Clearly, AIP funds, you can see what it can be used for, but it can't be used for new runways to expand capacity. So if I've got this amazing technology and I want it to come to my airport, how do I get the money if it's going to increase the capacity there? if you needed a runway extension, a taxiway, is it needed to attract a new class, or if you're doing it just for marketing purposes? Again, you can't use the AIP, so what are you going to use? If you're going to have it, again, I particularly at my airport, we maintain the fuel island. We then charge for that. Could be an FBO that maintains a fuel island. If this is an FBO, is an airport sponsor that's going to connect chargers, how are we going to do this? If you don't have, if it's in terms of an FBO at your particular airport, do you have to modify your minimum standards to allow for this particular new type of service? How do you define it? Is it air taxi? Is it, you're talking about air mobility. I can tell you right now, my minimum standards do not have air mobility as part of an identified service provided by my FBO. If you're putting in the chargers for your station, how do you charge for that? I know that there are some public entities who actually have public charging stations that they charge for. There's also private charging stations. How do you identify that cost? Clearly, I'm thinking that it's got to be, you've got to amortize or capitalize the cost of your capital investment for that. But then what about the legal impacts? Again, how does the grant assurances then apply to this type of service? In terms of, obviously, we know all of these are the ones that I thought of off the top of my head. Obviously, they would all apply to the particular use, but particularly, how do you monopolize the chargers? If I'm the airport sponsor, only I can have the chargers, but then you get into the other ones in terms of exclusive rights. What if somebody who has their own electric, it's not, what do you call it? It's not, eVTOL. So what happens if I'm the airport sponsor and I've decided that I want to have chargers alone and I'm going to have an electronic charging station, but then somebody comes in with their eVTOL and they say, no, I'm going to put one in my facility. So the more that I started thinking about it, my mind was just blown as to who bears the risk for all of this? What happens? Can there be a bad charge? I know that there's issues with bad fuel if somebody doesn't. I'm not saying, I did not mean to look at you when I said that. I'm like, hypothetically speaking, of course. What happens? Who bears the liability for that? Obviously, in California, for those of us who just suffered through the absolute nightmare of PSPSs, for those of you in Idaho and Arizona, those are public safety power shutoffs. How do you deal with this if all of a sudden we've now got an unreliable network? What do we do in terms of the power source, backup power source? Because God knows, definitely in terms of the Bay Area, you're going to have to deal with Bay Area air quality management if you want a generator, and God knows how you're going to get through that. So it started going on and on. Those were just my initial reactions, and so I just want to put it out there. Looking at Lori, I'm like, how do you even deal with the airport land use compatibility? And you talked about the flights. So I just wanted to just kind of throw that out there before we start getting into all of our own reactions and questions. With that.
All right. Hey. Woo. All right. Thank you. Fantastic. Well, I think we're going to open it up for questions. I know there's a lot of questions out there. And, the one burning in my mind, I guess, that I'd like the panel to best try to answer is how do airports even fit into this business model that Uber has developed? What is the need for airports as they exist now for this?
I can try to start, and I think I saw you nodding earlier, so maybe also would be interested in your impression. I think it's a good question actually for this group, but having come from the airport, I've worked at 2 airports as an airport planner, at Massport, at Logan Airport, and SFO, and so dealt with a full range. I worked on the finance side and on the planning and environmental side. So my first impressions and of, frankly, when I was starting to when I was joining Uber and folks were talking about all the regulations that might need to change and even noise metrics that may need to change, all I could think was I can see at least at the initial stage eVTOLs, so the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. They're aircraft, right? So the non-discrimination, I'm glad Bernadette actually walked through some of the assurances. I think thinking about, how do these aircraft fit into the existing obligations at least for our public use NIPIUS airports, I think I can see, a world where these fit in quite well into that environment. Airports have to be thinking about, where we're partnering also with at least one FBO today was announced. We're working with Signature Flight Support directly at some of to start thinking about some of the locations in our launch markets where we're going to be operating. But think about that. Like, think about, do you have the charging infrastructure today? Do you have the utility connections today for, they're at a scaled operation, and Amy can comment to, on this as well, and Brian is working on the infrastructure side. So there are lots of considerations in the, we're thinking about our own facility development at Skyports, working with Signature on the other side and the airport side. But I think there are a lot of considerations, but it's an aircraft like another aircraft. So it's just the way that it's fueled is different. So that's one of the big differentiators I think that airports need to be thinking about now.
I mean, the way I think about UAM, like if I were to start a company today, do another startup company, I did one a few years ago called automatic.com, which we sold, I would do it in airports. Or better still, maybe I would convince you to have the vertiport and I'd sell you the airport management software. The vertiport management software, that's the one the VCs would like. But I think that is now the growth opportunity. I mean, you can see there's a large number of aircraft manufacturers. That's not the business to enter at this time. Right?
Well, one thing for those of you who are, I don't know how many of you are working at some of the smaller airports in the system where, that went through the NIPIAS rewrite a few years ago where we went through this asset study. Are folks familiar with the study that FAA did? So I had the honor of being in management role while that study was being undertaken. There were a lot of airports in the system that were upset about being, where their designations in that report. But I think the interesting opportunity, and Joby's a great story, with Marina Airport locally here, that, underutilized, we have this great opportunity in this industry to potentially start using a lot of the underutilized facilities in the system. And so I think Brian mentioned it in his presentation, a big part of the strategy is not necessarily building, granted there's the beautiful architectural renderings of what the far future could look like, but what's the near-term future is, I think, a sustainable future where we're using existing aviation infrastructure, whether it's private use, existing private use heliport facilities that are utilized for mostly for emergency medical operations or for news helicopters and other functions. But thinking about the existing system and the opportunities to better utilize our existing aviation infrastructure is something else that we're really seriously thinking about.
Great, thank you. And maybe just as a follow-up, and then I'll open it up for everybody, is so if airports are going to play a role, how can us as airport operators or FBO operators place ourselves strategically in strategically advantageous positions to assist or be ready for the rollout of this oncoming technology? Any suggestions?
I have a question. There's several people here who operate airports or work at airports, right? How many of you have drones flying at your airports? Sorry? No, but there were about 4 or 5 hands up, right? There are drone operators who fly in some part of your airport, do they?
Right, not every day, but we've done LiDAR research with drones, and we've done promotional videos for our request for proposal. So we've coordinated flights on our airport while there's air traffic flying.
Yeah, because as a drone researcher, I've needed airports to fly in. I've flown at NASA Crow's Landing, I've flown at NASA Ames, I've flown at Camp Roberts Air Force Base. So like that, I mean, there are a lot of drone companies or groups that need airports to fly, right? And so you had sort of those one-off things that somebody comes and says that I want to test this thing here, right?
Not necessarily for testing, more so for just, data research, data collection,
Okay.
Or media right now. And then there are commercial drone operators that will operate around the airspace. But right now that's, we're still trying to figure out how to, for lack of better terms, play nice with the UAS operator and be safe on an airport when there's other air traffic. I mean, we don't want to have a conflicting situation there where there's a UAS that strikes an aircraft, and so that's the that's the hardest part right now, I think. How do you fly both of these, all this equipment in our airspace and do it safely?
But are these drone operators
And
also-
I think they need for you to use the mic
Yeah,
because
they won't go in.
it won't be recorded for later.
Are these drone operators a source of new business for the airports? Why they don't have?
Not really, no. No.
Yeah, right.
I'm from Salinas Airport. We're next door, and the only drone operator I know of in our area that is paying for their services at an airport is Joby Aviation, and they're going big. The little drones are just not. They're better off in a field away from the airport.
They don't need to pay an airport.
Right. Can I ask questions while I've got this? I've got two. I've got two unrelated questions. And one of them is, Danielle, you said very well that all forms of aviation are permitted at airports. We have skydiving and jets at some airports. But, so, yeah, they can fit in there, but it's going to change the airport. Is that going to change it to a Part 135 airport from a general aviation airport?
No such
So that would be a big shock to a lot of airport populations.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and in fact, where we're operating, it's interesting. We're operating this copter operation that Brian mentioned, and granted, that's a rotorcraft operation in New York, but we're operating out of the downtown Manhattan heliport, and it's the only 135 Part 135 certified heliport in the United States. So, just to give you a sense for, so it doesn't have, they don't have to be Part 139 certified, but they, Part 139. But we're operating with HeliFlight, which is a 135 operator.
Yeah.
So one of the
Right.
things that we're looking at, and we're still working through right now, we're an indirect air carrier, so we are acting as the charter operator partner to HeliFlight, which is a very reputable helicopter operator in New York. We're looking at what our business model is going forward. Will we be the 135 operator? At the same time, the aircraft that we're using are below like the current threshold for many of the requirements of a Part 139 airport. So we wouldn't necessarily. So if you're a GA airport, we could slot into the existing general aviation rules as an air taxi provider, and not necessarily require all of the security screening and some of the things that we think about. Although I will say that Uber is, we're thinking. We want to make this a really safe operation, so and secure. So we are thinking beyond, even though the size of the aircraft wouldn't trigger, they're under, I think, the 12,500 pound threshold for security screening, for instance. So we wouldn't necessarily require security screening, but we are looking at passenger screening. There are also requirements for electric aircraft in terms of or electric, battery-operated vehicles and aircraft through the National Fire Protection Association. So there's things that the NFPA standards for electric aircraft are different than for. It would be like if you had a commercial spaceport facility, you have to start thinking about, what would that look like at your airport? You can have commercial space operations. It just will really impact kind of how you're thinking about how you plan out your airport. And what the implications are for other services at your airport. This will be much less impactful in that sense, like in terms of in terms of the space that they're utilizing, and they can feed into existing air traffic management procedures. I mean, the airspace approach that Uber is taking will use both the unmanned air traffic management, the UTM approach of FAA right now, but also potentially operating in Class B airspace, and so thinking about, so it doesn't help for a general aviation airport. You're not necessarily concerned. Well, you might be in Class B airspace. It depends on where you're located, but I don't know about Salinas.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that not at first is it you could get started without having to go with all the security and then it but might lead into it as you grow.
Yeah, and
Uh,
you know, if we're you know, passengers are going through the FBO can provide some of those services too on a contract basis. It just really depends.
My other question is for Amy.
Oh.
You said you were in
Did you have-
process of certification. That implies a finished design on an aircraft. Is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Did I say that?
Well, that's what I heard. Well, I guess in the presentation I hear that aircraft are starting to pursue certification. I thought I heard you say that.
I
but I would have
think
been
that that's what
surprised.
they're working towards. I don't know that we're necessarily going through that, but I know that that's been that's one of
Get
those
his
big
attention, then
issues.
I'll get
Besides
his to
building the aircraft,
No,
it's
okay.
next steps would be going through certification to get it.
I think Jeff had a follow-up on that.
So, to your question, I'm Jeff Kresher. I'm the airport manager at Marina. I've done a lot of thinking about how we're working to try to be a successful partner with Joby Aviation, and so I think whether or not your airport is in the role of being a port where you're moving passengers, or whether your airport can serve an infrastructure support, such as locating facilities or, okay, geez. So locating facilities, or whether you can be a charging swap out location, those types of things. Those are all various roles. And so at the ACA conference in South Lake Tahoe, there was a panel up there, and I think for a lot of smaller GA airports that aren't appropriate for passenger landing ports or part of the infrastructure for moving passengers, airports should be looking at how to become part of the support infrastructure so that it helps our sustainability as smaller airports. And then when you have somebody like Joby Aviation, who's obviously making the eVTOL aircraft, you know, as an airport manager, you're thinking about how to, again, all the various uses that are allowed at an airport. We've got jets, we've got skydivers, we've got all these different mixes. I've even got ultralights, and I got a group of power gliders that want to come and do things at the airport. So at some point, you're thinking eVTOL, when you see them, what's modeled here, they're not going to want to be restricted to coming in on what the legacy aircraft have to do in terms of traffic approach or a traffic pattern. So how you locate them on your airport so that you can create different traffic patterns or other designations so that they can be as successful as possible. That's what an airport wants to do. Is an airport wants to be in a position to successfully partner with the company in either role, either as having a manufacturer there or being a part of the transport of passengers. So.
Thanks,
So-
Jeff. You got a question back
Yeah,
there.
Jeff, that was great comments. I'm Scott Malta. I'm the immediate past president of the Association of California Airports, and of course part of SWAHI, and I'm involved everywhere around the country, which is interesting. And this whole topic has been one that I've actually been sold out to, and I'm one of the believers that this is now versus some point in the future. Having said that, while I was president of ACA, we created a new committee called the Emerging Technologies Committee, just to be dealing with these kinds of things, to help drive the information down to our airports. And Jeff, you did a great job talking about what we did at the conference, because not everybody's hearing all of this stuff. And don't misunderstand, you know, Uber is going to start from the big cities, and you're going to go to rooftop, that kind of stuff. We get all that. But there are going to be general aviation airports and other airports that are going to be involved. And all the things that Bernadette talked about, those are the things that we've been discussing, to include even getting the FAA on board, because as Bernadette says so correctly, you know, if we're going to put a facility on our airport, it's got to be on our ALP, ALPs are typically a 5-year plan. The funding is a 5-year cycle, and you're talking 2023, for example. And so we're really trying to, and Matt, this goes back to your question of how do airports understand and get involved. We're really trying hard to get people aware of what's going on out there so that we can be thinking toward this. And I'll make one more comment, and this really was one that sparked my interest. We had, if I'm not mistaken, 8 different companies represented at our conference in Tahoe. And when I say 8 different companies, I'm talking 8 different people who are physically manufacturing or involved in the manufacturing of some kind of aerial vehicle. And when we asked the question about power source and charging, for example, you know, we talk about, okay, who's going to manage that? Is it going to be the airport? Is it going to be the FBO? But think about this. I have an iPhone. This is not my wife's, but my wife has a Samsung. Our 2 charging ports are completely different and they don't fit together. So when I asked the question of these 8 different companies, are you guys standardizing a charging port? And they all looked at me like, no. And then we had one company who was even talking about using compressed natural gas. So the point of saying all that is there's really going to be, for the airports that eventually get involved in this at our levels, there's going to be some infrastructure things we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about them now, and there needs to be some standardization within the industry. Otherwise, I mean, you could imagine we could have I guess they call them like a pigtail plug thing that would go to multiple aircraft or whatever. But there's so many different kinds of things that are being thought of right now without that standardization, and we could really use that.
So Scott, it's a great point, and Jeff also. Like, I think one of the things that I've found very interesting since joining Uber is that there's an organization called Vertical Flight Society. If folks familiar with this organization, and there's some folks there who are thinking about vertiport standards, and so Eddie Angelis was a prior -1, the associate administrator for airports at FAA, and when I left in December and had my sort of meeting, my last meeting with Kirk Schaefer, who some of you probably know because it's his second round as the associate administrator. He was like, we need to talk. He and Winsome were like, we need to talk about vertiport standards. So the FAA folks are thinking about this too. I think much of the discussion to date within FAA has been housed in the Unmanned Aircraft System Office, and so I think the reality is I think more of the issues they'll figure out the airspace, right? That'll get figured out. It's the physical infrastructure and all the things that you mentioned, and I think AAAE and ACI and the industry in the SAO. So we're talking about California, Cal Aeronautics, and I will put a marker down just so the folks from California airports in the room know that Chris forwarded me an email from the head of Cal Aeronautics who saw that we were on the agenda and he couldn't be here today. So just so you know, they are thinking about low altitude airspace and some of the policy implications for airports in the state. So there is interest there. We'll be, Brian and I and others from Uber will be following up on that. The airspace folks are working on some of these issues. But I would really urge your AAAE and other organizations and your committees to engage with Vertical Flight Society, with FAA, the FAA Technical Center under John Dermody and the Office of Safety and Standards is doing a lot of work in the space. There's a lot of thinking around, can we use the existing heliport design advisory circular to accommodate, to basically fit the Joby's aircraft and other eVTOL aircraft, and how well do those, they're advisory, but I think all the local communities who plan heliports are using that advisory circular, whatever it is, 5320, I think. So I think folks from the industry really need to engage in these committees, and I think to date it's been a lot of the aircraft manufacturers and communications, navigation, and surveillance providers, but I haven't seen the airports. So part of my role in this new policy role is engaging with the airport community and making sure that Brian, who's our head of infrastructure, he's really working to design all of these, is engaging too with the airport community. So these conversations are really important So other thoughts, because I think we'd love to hear, what folks are thinking about.
Judy?
Actually,
Oh, do you have-
this
okay,
gentleman's
go
been
ahead.
waiting for a
Yeah.
minute, and then we'll get back to you.
Hi. I've been a safety guy all my life, and the one thing I haven't heard come out yet is the safety of the aircraft. Are you in a position to figure out how these aircraft, and there's going to be a lot of them, how they're going to stay away from each other? That's my biggest concern. I think it's a great idea. It's a fantastic idea. That's the one concern that I have, is making sure that those planes are safe. Because there's going to be a lot of them up there. There's going to be drones up there. The skies are going to get very crowded. And that's my question.
I can speak to the safety of the aircraft, not so much in the airspace, but again, at Joby, the number one thing is safety, and we have people thinking about it all the time, constantly, and built into our aircraft is redundancy after redundancy, because it has always been our biggest priority. We know that this has to be, it's absolutely the safest aircraft in the sky. It just has to be if we're going to be commuting this way, and it's a really big piece of our company. The interesting thing about these aircrafts are you will see people are able to start testing with pilots eventually. I don't know where everyone's at this point, but when you see a huge airplane in the sky, I mean, they've never, right? They didn't build it and test it with a test pilot first, right? That went to market or whatever. At least as far as I know, this is the kind of thing that you can start off slowly and work towards having passengers in it, which is what I think people intend to do. But in terms of Joby and safety, it's been absolutely the number one thing within the aircraft built. Yeah.
I heard, and I'm sure Raja wants to talk. I'll just say two things about safety and then hand it off to Raja. So I didn't know when I joined Uber what their safety culture was going to look like in the aviation space. And I will say we have our director of flight safety is a gentleman by the name of John Ilson, who wrote basically the international standards for SMS, which many of you probably are developing airport SMS, where you have to. Some of you probably don't have to if you're in a general aviation airport, but he's amazing, and just the culture that he's creating and then going above and beyond at Uber on our copter operation is really impressive. And we also have some of the foremost leaders in airspace who left NASA to join Uber. So that has been really, I'm just very impressed, frankly, by the folks that Uber has thought to recruit and bring on to solve, and address some of these issues. And we've spent a lot of time on an airspace ConOps that is, safety is foremost in the minds of most of the people who, probably 100% of the people who are on the Elevate team. And it is different from the rest of the business that Uber has, all this other stuff that's grown really quickly, and they're learning about safety as they go along and having to make, obviously we're doing a lot on the ride side in terms of safety and rolling out new safety measures all the time. And I think, we've had to, sort of communicate that through the organization that in aviation it's different, right? So that safety culture and mindset is first and foremost, and it's a great challenge. The airspace issues are great challenges, but at the same time, I think the approach is, maintain safe separation of aircraft. So I think we're not going to, this idea that we would have, hopefully, we won't have that situation where aircraft are, and initially, I don't know if we said this at all, but initially, while these would be developed with autonomous sensors and systems, at least Uber's vision, there are some companies who have a vision for autonomous operations, even at the outset. But for Uber's vision is to have pilots in the cockpit. So they would have a single pilot and accommodate 3 to 4 passengers. So that's the vision. And so we won't have to get to an autonomous, with all the regulations that have to change for autonomous operations, we're not going to see that holistically in the system for many years. So I think the initial, getting to between, where we are today and 2030, it's going to be with a pilot in command of the aircraft.
Do you want to say something, Vish? He did his PhD on this, on the question that you asked, sir. Let's listen to what he has to say. I'll add something if necessary.
Yeah, so there are two sides to this, the aircraft safety and the aircraft airspace safety. So yes, we have done research on the airspace side of it. And at NASA, some of the research I do is actually looking at, so we take this approach of saying, first of all, as these things are coming in, we want the disruption to the existing manned airspace to be minimal, right? So we have done some research in that direction, and we have come up with ways to keep the manned part safe to some extent. For example, with the whole TCAS system on the manned aircraft. As Amy pointed out, there is studies on the aircraft itself, the unmanned aircraft safety side of it. We also look at different, how to kind of generalize the CD&R methods for the en route operations of things, right? Yeah, so that's sort of the updates I can share with you without being worried about it. I also had a comment for certain things which was said earlier, which is how can you guys as a community, be prepared or be involved in this. Is one of the things which came up repeatedly is this future needs that interaction between urban planners and the aviation community. The only place that exists today is through you guys. If of any form that exists today is through you guys, where urban policymakers talk to aviation people. So I think for something which is coming up, which needs this to the best extent possible, you guys should take the lead on it to create that communication. For example, even the whole problem of saying, there's a little bit of local and state money which comes in, but that has to be defensible. Here you have an opportunity to tell them, oh, you need to put more money in this because we can actually help you with this, right? So yeah, those are the things I wanted to say.
All right, so I'll make a comment about the safety. Should I, Matt? All right.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm a university professor, right? So I can stick out my neck and say things, because nothing I say matters, actually. So it's something like this, right? That there was that video that showed up with that massive red, and I didn't go through it at that time, but that's from Vishwanath's work. So it's something like this, that when the general aviation airspace operates under visual flight rules, right? Higher altitude airspace, mostly, not always. What were you referring to? Okay, yeah, right. So, and that's coming, and with next gen and all that, we're going to have more of it, right? Under 3,000 feet, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Any aircraft on a 135 or a 121
flies, okay,
has
so-
to be
so-
in IFR.
Right, and in that case, right, the idea of filing a flight plan, right, and then flying ensures, so there's a service, there's an infrastructure that's providing deconfliction, right? That is ensuring that these things are not in conflict, or at least conflict is at a level that can be handled, right? When aircraft fly under VFR rules, then it's one pilot and another pilot, and it goes like that. When you think about how you drive your car, right? The roadway environment doesn't have any separation services, right? But the roadway environment, if you think about it, is very carefully structured to ensure that drivers and cars, it's like there's just pilots and aircraft, drivers and cars, never solve more than a 4-vehicle conflict problem. When you follow a car in front, it's a 2-vehicle conflict problem. When you change lanes, it's a 3-vehicle conflict problem. The car behind the gap, the car in front of the gap, and your car. Sometimes what happens is while you're changing lanes, somebody else turns in too. And you get scared, right? That becomes too much. The 4 vehicle comes at a stop sign, but then we put a stop sign. And if there's anything more than 4 vehicles simultaneously in conflict, we put a traffic light. Right. Now, here's the analysis that Vishwanath did in his PhD. Here's what it shows. You take an area like the Bay Area, right, up to 10,000 aircraft a day, the density of conflict is such that a paradigm like this can work. If you cross 10,000 aircraft a day, right, you cross, not aircraft, flights. You cross 10,000, right? And with the math I was doing, there were 10,000 flights a day. If Uber puts 1,000 aircraft in a city and there's so many trips an hour and so many hours, you get 1,000 flights a day. Or you get 10,000 flights a day. Now, the moment you move above that, somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000, here's what you observe when you do the analysis. Sometimes, as many as 90 aircraft are simultaneously in conflict. There is no aircraft-based technology that can handle that kind of thing. I mean, this is my view as a person who's worked in computer science, the theoretical and the practical sides. There is nothing any aircraft manufacturer can do to handle that. There's a reason why in higher density airspace we have separation services. We structure the airspace to ensure that these kinds of high dimension problems do not arise. So in that regime, sir, right, when you say there will be, like, if all this really takes off, and we're moving 1% of the people by air or 10% of the people by air, and then Amazon is doing 10% of the UPS and FedEx package delivery volume, we will cross that 10,000 aircraft in a metro region threshold. And then I think the airspace of whatever kind will need structure, airways or roads, just like they'll need structure and some kind of separation services. And somebody is gonna have to pay for that.
I think we got one last question,
Smart
and we'll
aircraft needs smart
wrap it up.
That's the
I did hear somebody make the comment that they needed 2 landings every minute to meet what the projections were for the amount of traffic. And I don't, unless you have parallel runways, I don't think any airport is landing 2 aircraft a minute, are they? If you're an IFR separation, I don't know. No. So, anyways, one final question, then I think we're running out of time.
Yep. I'll be quick. Brian, I guess this is for you. A very impressive vision of what the vehicle will look like. More impressive than the Hyundai my last Uber driver picked me up in. But when I think the hardest thing I have wrapping my head around is this occurring by 2023. I mean, are we close to having a working prototype? What would that vehicle cost? And it seems to be based on the Offspring technology, which is not, I'm not a pilot, but I understand that's a very difficult plane to fly. So you would think you have a lot of hurdles with this 3-year time frame.
I was just saying, I think this is both a question for myself and for Joby. I think we could say that Joby is probably furthest along in the space and where we expect to be launching with. So that's kind of, yes, where we think that we're going to be. From an infrastructure standpoint, I think very similarly, it's very close. And like I said, we're looking at those parking garage rooftop conversions, existing operating infrastructure that we can repurpose. And so we're not total greenfield and not expecting to be able to go total greenfield with our operations. And so taking an existing helipad and operating helipad operation and repurposing it for the eVTOL work is how we're going to get there for 2023. And then as well, probably the airport route is going to be required. I mean, that's the only way that's going to make our urban skyport viable is I think that first, what we call hero routes, and we can identify those in our rider data of what those hero routes are in any kind of metropolitan area. And so looking at the airports to the first node makes the most sense, which is kind of what we're doing in New York with the copter program and testing that out and perfecting our software for that. Do you want to talk about?
Actually, you had a picture of the prototype. We have it. It's I think one of your slides. Yeah. So our prototype's already built. And again, the nice thing about it's not a drone, but it's definitely when we go towards testing, it won't have anyone in it at first. So it can be tested and tested before it even has a passenger. But we're really excited and lucky to be working with Jeff at the Marina Airport, because by the end of February, we'll have our first aviation tent structure up, and we're working towards building our manufacturing facility there, starting sometime in the spring, and that's where we'll be able to continue to make the aircraft, and that's where Toyota is helping us a lot in terms of how to run a manufacturing line. Yeah.
What's the price point? Because aircraft are expensive because of liability that is associated with them.
I don't know that I'm allowed to say that. And check with anyone today before I came here.
Good spot to wrap it up then.
Okay, great. Man, what an exciting, visionary, informational session. And I want to thank everybody on the panel, Danielle, Brian, Raja, Amy. You pinch hit. You didn't know what you were getting yourself into, but thank you all for the information about the exciting future. And appreciate you guys coming out, and we can all give them a round of applause.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thank all of you. We really appreciate it, and we'll, I'm sure, be hearing more as time goes on. There'll be more and more to add to it. Thank you. We do have one more thing, and that's our annual quiz, Cahoots. So as Chris comes up, I think she has instructions, and her husband Carl is always kind enough to put Cahoots together for us. And I have a Starbucks gift card for the winner, so there's something in it if you have your mobile phones ready. Are you ready?
We will be.
Okay.
So you want to make sure you log into the Wi-Fi probably if you haven't done that
Okay.
already, and feel free to play as a team if you want. If everyone.
Yep, you can do it either way, individually or as a team.
Correct. That's what I said. Feel free if you want to play together as a.
Yeah.
They can yell out questions to each other. So make sure you log in. It's on your table, so go ahead and do that. It does not require downloading the app. It's just going to the website that's up there, kahoot.it. So feel free to keep going with that one. We're going to walk you through the instructions, and then we'll give you this PIN number as we go through. So I'm just going through the instructions as you're logging in and getting ready. And you're going to enter a nickname. So it can be anything you want it to be. As you go through, there'll be questions and answers on the screen. Yep.
Didn't give it to us yet.
I just showed you. It's right here on the card, right on your table. Wi-Fi is 2020, and then all capitals SWAE. So right on your table. Yeah, the pin's going to come. We haven't gotten that yet. So we will. I'm just going through the instructions at the moment.
Okay.
But then there'll be questions and answers. What you're going to see on your phone is just colors. You're going to see these 4 colors. That's
Chris,
it.
they're saying they want to know how to log in once they're at Cahoots. You need
The pin, correct.
Okay. Are they ahead of you or behind?
I think they're a little bit ahead of me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just kind of going through the instructions and explaining how it's going to happen. This is what I was told to do. And I have a disclaimer on this one for me and my husband both. We did not make these questions, so if they're wrong, we have nothing to do with them. There's somebody else in the room that made them. So when we get through, you're going to get the pin, that this is what it's going to look like. You'll have 10 seconds to pick a color and a shape on your phone. I'm going to be reading everything. There are some really long ones, so, and you get points by the person that answers the correct answer fastest. So you might all get the correct answers, but the first person to actually have hit that button actually gets a few extra points. 1,000 points are available for each correct answer. The faster you answer, the more points you get. Are you ready? Everybody got their phones ready? Game's pin is coming in 1 quick second. He's going to go to it now. It's different each time, so this is what. There is the game pin for this game, 7917960. Tell me if you haven't logged in yet. We're up to 14 people so far, 15, 16.
Oops.
Everybody in?
Anybody have any
Anyone
trouble?
else trying to get in? Let me know. Raise your hand if you're still trying to get in and haven't yet.
I see a lot of green, so people
All
I see
right.
are in.
Okay, I think we're ready to go. This moves fast, so.
Let me get out of the way.
It's coming. The APMA was incorporated in this year. Red.
Wait.
Yeah, that is a. Sorry. This is a different conference. It was here. It was here.
This is Carl's real life.
Hang on a second.
I was studying it. That was a trick question.
All right. Different game. Here we go. Carl, you got all the questions up right now. You've got all the questions up, so you might want to, like, something. Okay. A new pin. You're going to get a new pin. Sorry.
My purse, because I need the Starbucks card.
Okay. 218-5709 is this pin.
Is this yours? No.
So we knew we had 20 people trying to get in. Three more? Two more? Two more people still wanting to play? We had 20 before. 19, one more? Someone drop out? Everyone in? Somebody buddied up, someone dropped out? Are we good? Anyone else trying to get in?
I say go for it.
Okay, let's go. The role of the attorney. 12 questions. Which of the following items does not have the potential to contain PFAS? Red, new unwashed clothing, yellow, polyless nitrate gloves, blue, sunscreen, and green, water-resistant clothing. Three seconds left. One more person. Come on, answer.
You are timed.
Woo, 12 people got it right. Awesome. Steve's in the lead. Next question. AIP funds can only be used for red, new runways to expand capacity at an airport, blue, runway extensions needed to attract a new class of aircraft or for marketing, yellow, in furtherance of statutory identified policies, and green, drinks and appetizers at schooners in the lounge. Woo! Let's go. Someone's jumped up. Next question. Section 163B, exemptions. FAA may regulate to ensure red, the safe and efficient operation of aircraft or safety of people or property on the ground. Blue, that airport owner receives or pays fair market value. Yellow, both red and blue. And green, none of the above.
What is it? About 10.
All right. Hang on. Now, this next one has one question or one of the ready answer that's really abbreviated, so I'm going to read it pretty quickly. Oh, six. Yeah. Did everyone get that? Land oh gosh, what is this one? Red, the acquisition, use, lease, encumbrance, transfer, or disposal of land by an airport owner or operator. Blue, Surplus Property Act land or PFC land or facilities. Yellow, both red. You guys read them?
Well, 7 of them still got it.
Tongue twister. Sorry about that one. This is the tough one. This is the tough one. FAA may not directly or indirectly regulate. There are exceptions. The acquisition, use, land, encumbrance, transfer, or disposal of land by an airport operator or owner. Blue, any facility upon such land. Yellow, any portion of such land or facility. And green, all of the above. All right. Which is the busiest single runway airport in the world? Red, Mumbai, blue, London, Gatwick, yellow, Istanbul, or green, San Diego? Which is the busiest single runway airport? Red is the answer. Half of you. Next one. How many Part 139 certificated heliports are in the United States? Red 0, blue 1, yellow 2, or green 5?
Danielle hinted at this or said
Yeah,
it
she
during
did.
her presentation.
You did give it away.
Ooh,
Whoa,
pretty
a lot of
good.
people.
Yeah.
Very good. Paying attention, paying attention. Number 8, when does Uber plan to launch eVTOL service? 2021 red, 2022 blue, 2023 yellow, or 2026 green? Everyone was paying attention.
Yeah.
Next one. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go. Oh, it is close here. There's only 200 points, a little over 250 there. Number 9. What does UTM stand for? Urban Transportation Management red, Unmanned Air Traffic Management blue, Under Time Management yellow, or Urban Traffic Management green?
I'm sure it's blue.
Blue, Unmanned Air Traffic Management. Couple left. Ah, someone else just jumped up. Whoa.
Oh, it's getting tricky.
All right, very 50 points now. The National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 was last amended in red 1975, blue 1986, yellow 1996, or green 2019. 3 more people, 2 more, 1. 1986. What are those standings? All right. Got a little ahead now. Got a little ahead. All right, almost time, 11. When was the first flight of an electric aircraft under its own power, and how long did it last? Red, 1965 for 5 minutes, blue, 1973 for 14 minutes, yellow, 1985 for 15 minutes, or green, 1988 for 8 minutes. Ooh, 1973 for
And
14
Game Master
minutes.
Carl came up with that question.
No, he didn't come up with it. No,
Okay.
he was given it, but he verified it.
Oh,
We did
okay,
verify
okay.
that one.
Okay.
And, okay, look at the score here, 9,000, okay. And we are on our last question. Who will win? Who's going to win Super Bowl 54? Red, Kansas City, or blue, San Francisco? Everyone was right on that one, so. Or everybody was wrong, either way, whichever
Either
way I
way.
look at it. But. So who won? Third place, Steve. Second place,
Yay.
19.
Yay!
All right, 10 out of 12.
And number 1.
And first, 90.
Who is that?
Scotty, good
Oh,
job.
Scotty.
And
Good
that's
for
'cause
you,
answered
Scotty.
faster on one of them. Only because you answered faster is the only
Yes,
reason. 'cause
yes,
you
the
both got 10 out of 12.
speed does help, yes. Here is your Starbucks card. I think they even have Starbucks in North Carolina, so you're good. Thank you, Chris. Chris Morello is my go-to person along with Bernadette. Always. She had the idea for this session. Again, want to thank the Uber folks and Raja. Thank you all. We are adjourned. There are evaluation forms if you have a thought for next year and somebody that wants to take it over. Thank you all. Safe travels and very much appreciate